Welcome back to my Black Myth Wukong Deep Dive series, where we're exploring the story of the game in great detail, connecting all the clues, covering context from Journey to the West, and analyzing what it all means. Today is all about Chapter 2. We have a lot of different storylines happening all over the place and at different points in time. There are also a bunch of name changes in this chapter, so I'll be going over all the various plotlines first, and then I'll tie it all together and discuss my interpretations at the end. If you haven't seen my first two videos in this series covering the prologue and Chapter 1, I'll link to the playlist up top and in the description box. The way that Black Myth story progresses, it builds upon core concepts and themes that are introduced early on, so I highly recommend you watch those. This way, you'll understand why I make certain deductions, because a lot of the story is left intentionally vague, and we have to extrapolate from between the lines. To understand Chapter 2, we actually need to start with this character, Gourd Grandpa, whose actual name is Yuan Shoucheng from the original novel. The Destined One first meets him in Chapter 1, where he teaches us how to use our gourd to absorb spirits. And we meet him again in Chapter 2, where he greets us by saying he calculated that we would arrive. Of course he did, because he is actually a fortune teller who can divine the future, and he is arguably the character who caused the entire Journey to the West pilgrimage to happen in the first place. He then briefly tells us about the Dragon King of the Jing River, Jinghe Longwang. This character tried to defy his destiny, so the Jade Emperor intended to punish his entire family. In a lot of Chinese fantasies, it is a common trope that even if only one person is guilty, the entire line has to suffer consequences if the offense is severe enough. But in this instance, it's often interpreted as a criticism of authority, where the smallest offense could get you capital punishment. For more context, in the novel, there once was a fisherman and a woodcutter who lived on the banks of the Jing River outside the city of Chang'an, which was the capital of China in ancient times. The fisherman tells the woodcutter about a fortune teller in the city who is so precise with his predictions that he can tell exactly where to catch fish and shrimp. He had repeated this 100 times and never missed even once, so the fisherman intended to continue going to the fortune teller to ensure his ongoing fishing success. It just so happens that a yaksha who is patrolling the river overhears this conversation, and he immediately goes to report to the Dragon King, shouting that this is a disaster, because if the fortune teller continues giving such accurate calculations, it would eradicate the water tribe and consequently diminish the Dragon King. The king was understandably angry and wanted to slay the fortune teller, but his dragon sons and basically every minister, carp, crab, and shrimp told him to restrain his anger and quoted the proverb, 过耳之言,不可听信. This literally translates to, words that pass by the ear should not be trusted. In other words, don't believe everything you hear. The expression advises caution in believing or acting upon information that is heard casually, without proper verification or evidence. And isn't that so fitting? Because as we'll later see, the relic we'll acquire at the end of Chapter 2 is Wukong's ears, called Ear That Hears and Rages, which the game translates to fuming ears, referring to when you hear something that makes you angry. So the Dragon King's advisors recommend that he disguise himself and go to Chang'an to investigate. If there is indeed a fortune teller, he can slay him then, but if not, there's no need to harm innocent people. The Dragon King agrees and changes himself into a white-robed scholar. Yes, scholars do be loving those white robes. He finds the fortune teller in the city, who is Yuan Shoucheng, and asks him to forecast when it will rain tomorrow and by how much. Yuan Shoucheng gives him very precise answers, saying exactly when the clouds will begin to gather, when thunder will be heard, when the rain will start, and when it will end. He also says there will be 3 feet, 3 inches, and 48 drops of rain. So very, very specific. The Dragon King is amused at this point because, as the deity of the Jing River, he's the one who oversees the rain. So he tells Yuan Shoucheng that if his prediction is correct, he will give him 50 taels of gold. But if his prediction is wrong, he will trash his shop. The Dragon King, his sons, and aquatic officials all have a good laugh at this back at their palace later. But then, an imperial decree from the Jade Emperor appears, commanding the Dragon King to summon thunder and rain at the exact time and exact amount that the fortune teller had predicted. The Dragon King's spirit leaves his body from the shock. After he regains consciousness, one of his counselors suggests adjusting the timing and the amount of rain by a fraction because that would prove Yuan Shoucheng's prediction was inaccurate, and the Dragon King would win the bet. He agrees. And the next day, he adjusts the timing back by 1 hour, and there ends up being only 3 feet and 40 drops of water. He then transforms back into a white-robed scholar, goes to the fortune teller's shop, and starts trashing the place, all while calling Yuan Shoucheng a fraud. But the fortune teller just sits there, unbothered. He says he knew he was actually the Dragon King in disguise, and that he was doomed to die because he disobeyed heaven's decree. The Dragon King then falls to his knees and asks to be saved. Yuan Shoucheng says he will be executed the next day by a human prime minister called Wei Zheng at 12:45. If he wants to live, he'll have to plead his case to Emperor Taizong, who was a human emperor and the actual real-life ruler in China during the Tang Dynasty. So the Dragon King enters the emperor's dream while he's sleeping and asks to be saved. Taizong agrees. When he awakes, the emperor goes to hold court with his ministers, but today of all days, Wei Zheng is missing. That's because he received an imperial decree from the Jade Emperor, whose authority trumps the human emperors. Wei Zheng dreamed of beheading the Dragon King at exactly 12:45, so he had skipped out on court to prepare. But Emperor Taizong summons him anyway and suggests they play chess. By 12:45, Wei Zheng suddenly falls asleep right in the middle of the match. And when he awakens a bit later, a minister arrives to report that a dragon head had fallen from the sky. See, when Wei Zheng fell asleep, his spirit left his body and he beheaded the Dragon King in a dream, just as heaven commanded. Taizong was saddened that he couldn't keep his word, and that night he dreamt of the Dragon King holding his bloody head in his hands, wailing to give him back his life. The emperor was powerless, but then Bodhisattva Guanyin appeared to save him, and the dragon immediately left to file a lawsuit of wrongful death against the emperor in the underworld. There's a very long chapter after this detailing what happens when Emperor Taizong allegedly dies and goes to the underworld. The 10 kings of the underworld determined that the Dragon King's death was not his fault because it was already preordained in the Book of Life and Death that he would be executed by a human. This is the same book I mentioned in my Prologue Explained video that Wukong had crossed his name out of. So Taizong gets to go back to life, and on the path back, he comes across many sites, one of which is the sixfold path of reincarnation, which in Buddhism are the 6 categories that sentient beings can be reborn into based on their karma and good deeds. This includes gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell denizens. He is told to remember this and proclaim it in the world of the living, and is also instructed to hold a grand mass to help the souls of those who died a wrongful death to reincarnate. Sure enough, when he comes back to life, he does all these things, embraces virtue, and organizes a grand mass. This is the same grand mass I mentioned in my chapter 1 video where Tang Sanzang was selected as the head priest for this ceremony and given a kasaya and priestly staff from Guanyin. And as part of the emperor's focus on Buddhism, the monk was to go to the west to retrieve scriptures. See, it all ties together. And this is why Yuan Shoucheng can be seen as the catalyst for the actual pilgrimage to the west, because it was his divination that set all the necessary events into motion. In the novel, I believe the Dragon King had 9 sons, but 4 of them specifically lived in rivers, and these are the 4 we will get to encounter in the game. In present-day Black Myth, we get some new information when Yuan Shoucheng tells us that the Dragon King shed a scale when he was beheaded, and that his 4 sons went into hiding upon his death. Gourd Grandpa then kind of scoffs at the notion of being an immortal, saying that not even they have control over their destinies, and that we are all ultimately subject to our karma. So you may be wondering, why is this whole affair with the dragons relevant here? Aside from the proverb about fuming ears, I personally think it's a great parallel to Wukong's plight. The Dragon King, for all his efforts, despite his powers, despite being an immortal, despite having Emperor Taizong on his side, even he could not escape his destiny to die by the judge's hand. Similarly, Wukong, despite achieving immortality, despite completing the journey to the west, despite being named the victorious fighting Buddha, he still wound up with the tightening band on his head at the end of the day. So this is making us think, what's the point of trying to defy destiny if we can't actually escape it? There's more to uncover with the Dragon Sons, especially in future chapters, so we'll put a pin in this for now. There are also a couple of other things that happen during undetermined time periods way before chapter 2 that will be relevant to the story. First, before the actual journey to the West pilgrimage began, there was a rodent who lived at the foot of Lingshan, Spirit Mountain, which is where Buddha resides. One day, the rat stole some oil from Buddha's lamp and became afraid when he saw the light began to dim, so he ran away. This rodent is the yellow-furred rat, the yellow-winged guai, the yellow-winged great king, and the yellow-winged sage that we'll meet and see referenced in the game. Why do some Chinese characters have so many different names? In this case, you can think of them like titles, so they can change based on their station, and they can also be inherited by other characters. Buddha didn't think the rodent was guilty of death just for stealing oil, so he tasked Bodhisattva Ling Qi to detain him. Ling Qi isn't an actual Buddhist figure in real life as far as I know. He was made up for the novel. Second is about the kingdom of Sahali, Sahali Guo, which is only super briefly mentioned in chapter 59 of the novel when the group reaches the flaming mountain and they are all wondering why it's so hot. If this sounds familiar, it's because this is where Sun Wukong meets Rakshasi, so it's more relevant for chapter 5 of the game. Chapter 2 of the game focuses on chapter 19 and 20 from the novel, so you may be wondering, why is a future chapter currently relevant? This is because it's the only point in the novel that specifically mentions the kingdom of Sahali. Zhu Bajie is the one to tell the group that at the kingdom of Sahali, the sun sets each day into the western sea, and they call this place Tianjingtou, which can be translated to the edge of heaven. This was a sun of true fire, so it would create a deafening sizzle that sounded like flames plunging into water. This sound was so vicious, it was capable of killing children in the city, so the king had people beat drums each afternoon to cancel out the sounds and counteract its effects. The novel doesn't specify how they got the idea to beat the drums. And in Black Myth, when we meet the Yellow-Wind Sage in the hidden area later on, his Chinese dialogue indicates that it's the people of the edge of heaven who invented this method to counteract the sun. But if we dig a bit deeper into the journal entries, this is where the game deviates from the source text. In Black Myth, this large drum is called the Drum of the Setting Sun and was specifically stated to be a gift from Buddha. The common people were so grateful, they created golden statues of Buddhas, and the land became known as the Buddhist Land of Gold. One problem fixed, but another arises. The people's reverence for the Buddha eventually grew to overshadow their regard for their ruler. The king wasn't happy about this, so he razed the temples, banished its monks, and changed the kingdom's name again. To recap, it was originally called the Kingdom of Sahali. Then it was changed to the Buddhist Land of Gold. And now it was changed to the Kingdom of Flowing Sands. The Kingdom of Flowing Sands isn't mentioned in Journey to the West until chapter 66, which covers Yellow Brow. So basically, Black Myth combined the Kingdom of Sahali and the Kingdom of Flowing Sands into one, even though they were separate in the novel. They took this a step further by giving the King of Sahali, aka King of the Buddhist Land of Gold, aka King of Flowing Sands, 3 sons. The first 2 sons I believe are original to the game, but the devs made the youngest son, Xiaozhang Taizi, who is the actual Prince of Flowing Sands from the novel during the Yellow Brow arc. This next part is also all original to the game. After the newly named Kingdom of Flowing Sands turned away from Buddhism, the drum beats actually end up attracting a giant beetle to appear, which terrorized the kingdom. Fearing this was karmic retribution, the king halted his suppression of the Buddhist faith, but they still couldn't defeat the beetle. Now who should appear but the yellow-furred rat who ran away from Spirit Mountain, and because he had a righteous heart, he wanted to help them. He managed to defeat the beetle, and the king honored him with the title of Royal Sage. So he decided to stay. And at the sage's suggestion, the king also issued the Rodent Reverence Edict, which declared that rats were celestial beings protected by law, making it illegal to harm them. This naturally prompted other rodent guai from all around to migrate into the city. This edict is not in the Journey to the West novel, but this storyline with the rats may have been adapted from some of the real Tang monks' travel notes, which mentions a region called Yutian 1, there is a mural that was discovered in this region which depicts what appears to be a rat deity, a human male figure, and several Buddhas. The legend around this mural is a bunch of golden rats helped the king fend off an invading army by chewing through their bowstrings and other equipment. In gratitude, the king allegedly built a temple in the western part of the region to honor these rats. Pretty cool of game science to pull inspiration from different places, if this is actually where they got the idea from. But back to the game storyline, a bit after the Rodent Reverence Edict was passed, everyone who still resided in the Kingdom of Flowing Sands suddenly turned into rats, including the king and the first and second prince. The third prince had left, so he wasn't affected. The Yellow Wind Sage said it was a calamity that he brought upon the people, and so he left. Later, at an unspecified time, the yellow rat was eventually taken in as a disciple by Bodhisattva Lingqi and founded his temple in the Yellow Wind Ridge. And this is where the game merges back into the Journey to the West storyline. At this point, the traveling band consists of the Tang Monk, Sun Wukong, Zhu Bajie, and the White Horse. Upon reaching Yellow Wind Ridge, they meet a fierce striped tiger who wants to capture some mortals for his master, who is the yellow rat, now called the Yellow Wind Great King. This tiger vanguard has a special technique which allows him to puncture his own chest, grip his skin, and rip off his entire hide. So Wukong and Bajie are engaging him in battle and trying to catch him, but the tiger vanguard uses this technique and throws his fur over a large rock to mislead them, while his true form changes into the wind, kidnaps the Tang Monk, and takes him back to his master. The Yellow Wind Great King says they should wait to eat him to see if his disciples come knocking. If they don't, then they can feast in peace. Meanwhile, Wukong and Bajie are attacking the tiger skin on the rock, only to have their weapons bounce back. It was then that they discovered the ruse and realized the monk had been kidnapped. Note this is the same thing that happens when we as the Destined One fight the Tiger Vanguard in Chapter 2. He will turn into stone, and if you hit him with a regular attack, you'll be deflected. Wukong and Bajie search throughout the mountain and finally find the culprits at the Yellow Wind Cave, and Wukong tells them to return his master immediately. The yellow rat is worried, but the Tiger Vanguard says, "Relax, I got this. Let me get the boys and we'll take care of this." So he brings 50 of his toughest Yao Guai out to face Wukong. He and Wukong only fight for 4 or 5 rounds, which may seem like a lot, but remember, in Journey to the West, Wukong fought the Black Bear, the same one from Chapter 1, for 10 rounds, and Erlang for over 300, so 4 to 5 is nothing. The Tiger Vanguard quickly has no strength left, and the only thing he can do is run as Wukong chases him. Zhu Bajie hears the commotion and comes over to help, slamming his rake down on the tiger's head, disconnecting him from life. Wukong then drags the dead Tiger Vanguard back to the cave to confront the Yellow Wind Great King. The yellow rat is understandably upset at the death of his vanguard, so he fights Wukong for 30 rounds, but neither could gain the upper hand. At this point, Wukong uses his Shen Wai Shen Fa, body beyond the body ability, to create 100 copies of himself. To counter, the Yellow Wind Great King uses his special talent to summon a mighty wind. This part is actually quite entertaining to me because the novel includes a lengthy poem detailing how this powerful wind was messing with a bunch of other characters who weren't even near the fight. For example, it says, "The wind ruffled the Queen Mother's skirt in heaven. Poor Erlang somehow got lost on his way to the city, and Ne Zha had a harder time lifting his sword." It's really trying to drive home the point that this wasn't some regular wind. This was the Sanmei Shenfeng, divine wind of Samadhi, which was so strong it's described as being able to dim heaven and earth. This wind blows away all of Wukong's copies, sending the monkeys cartwheeling through the air. So Wukong tries attacking the Yellow Wind Great King again, only to take a wind blast straight to the face. If you watched my last video, you'll know Wukong has a special eye ability called Huo Yan Jing Jing, or Fiery Golden Eyes, which allows him to see great distances and see through disguises. While this is very handy, Wukong got these eyes from being burned in Lord Lao's furnace for 49 days, where the flames caused his eyes to become very sensitive. So the yellow rat's Samadhi wind attack forced Wukong's eyes shut. He could not open them, so he could only run away. He reunites with Ba Jie, and they find accommodations for the night at a small cottage where an old man and several young farmers live. Wukong asks if there are any eye doctors, and curiously, this old man just happens to have some eye medicine he allegedly got from a stranger he met that can cure all wind-induced eye problems. He puts some ointment on Wukong's eyes, and the next day he's fully healed. In fact, he says he can see even better than before. But oddly, the cottage had disappeared. The old man and the farmers were gone. This is because he was actually one of the guardians of Dharma who disguised himself to help. Wukong then transforms into a mosquito and returns to the Yellow Wind Cave. He manages to sneak in and finds his master, the Tang monk, who is tied to a pole and weeping profusely. He tells his master to relax and that they need to defeat the Yellow Wind King before they can rescue him. He then flies over to spy on the enemies and overhears the Yellow Wind King saying that only Bodhisattva Lingji could overpower his wind. So Wukong goes to find Lingji at his home. By the way, this happens often in the novel, where if Wukong has trouble defeating someone, he'll go to find their master and get their help and or some sort of item to subdue the enemy. We see this pattern in the game as well. In the novel, Bodhisattva Lingqi tells him that Rulai Fu commanded him to keep the Yellow Wind Guai in submission. Buddha also gave him a Dingfeng Zhu, a wind-stopping pearl, which is translated as the wind tamer in the game, as well as the Fei Long Bao Zhang, the flying dragon precious staff, which is translated as the golden Loong staff in game. Remember this staff because it does become relevant to the game story, as we can actually craft it after defeating the 4 dragon sons. Lingji goes with Wukong back to Yellow Wind Cave and has Wukong lure him out. The Yellow Wind King and Wukong engage in a few rounds, and just as he was about to summon his divine wind, the Bodhisattva throws down his staff. The staff turns into a golden dragon with 8 claws, which we see depicted in the ending tapestry. The dragon grabs the Yellow Wind King and throws him against the rocks on the mountain cliff, causing him to change back to his original form, a yellow-furred rat. Lingji takes the rat back to Buddha, and then we learn in Black Myth that the rat returns to Yellow Wind Ridge again. Fast forward some more, and now we can get to present-day Black Myth. Chapter 2 is Yellow Sand, Desolate Dusk, and we as the Destined One have now arrived at Yellow Wind Ridge, a sandy and rocky biome where a headless monk regales us with a song. This type of lyrical storytelling is called Shanbei Shuoshu, which is a traditional art form of storytelling from the northern part of Shanxi province in China that presents a combination of folktales, history, and entertainment in their local dialect. He is also playing a sanxian, a traditional Chinese instrument which literally translates to 3 strings. As you listen, keep in mind the proverb the Dragon King's advisor said, to not believe everything you hear. After all, folk songs aren't always accurate, and bards are notorious for being unreliable narrators. This headless monk tells us a story of how the land was once buzzing with joy and glee before the rats took over. He sings that Wukong asked the Bodhisattva for help. That part we know is true, as shown in the novel, but then he adds that the yellow rat went on a killing spree. A bit suspicious because I don't recall the rat killing anything in the novel, so the killing spree must be in Black Myth storyline. The Headless Monk also reappears multiple times in this chapter, so we will investigate him a bit more as the chapter progresses. Moving onwards, the Destined One eventually encounters 2 rat guai. The larger one is the second rat prince, and the smaller one is the king of flowing sands, the same king I mentioned earlier who used to be human and kept renaming his kingdom. From their conversation, we learn that the tiger temple is littered with the bones of their fellow rat kin, but they can't do anything about this for now because their master, the Yellow Wind Sage, has secluded himself in the valley. From this, we know the rats and tigers are at odds with one another. During this fight, we have 2 options. If you kill the father first, the second rat prince becomes distraught. From his portrait, we learn that while he was strong, he was simple-minded. As such, he was the least favored by the king, but he was the most loyal. After defeating the second prince here, the Headless Monk appears again, singing that he grieves for the 2 rats. He doesn't sound that sad to me. In Black myth, the king also had a third son who was clever and wise. He was the king's most trusted child, and he's also my favorite. We don't meet him until chapter 3, but we learn in chapter 2 he's estranged from his family. This is because he's fond of Buddhist teachings, and when the king issued the Rodin Reverence Edict and executed the ministers who opposed it, he decided to leave in protest. More about him in my next video. If you kill the son first, the father will run off and summon his eldest son, who promptly eats him, committing patricide and regicide. From his portrait, we learn that the eldest was actually the king's favorite son and fierce warrior, but he was locked away for disrespecting the Yellow Wind Sage. We can also infer that he suffered some sort of a mental break from the shock of discovering everyone had turned into rats, so he has no memories of his family. So eating his rat dad was like any other meal to him. During the fight against the first prince, you may be able to get him to run into a clay wall, revealing a crack. You can also use the Wandering White, the Rock Guai transformation, or a fully charged Smash Stance attack to break it open. Entering this area, we can see the same mural that was revealed previously in a trailer at the Game Awards, which depicts Wukong and his first master, Patriarch Bodhi, who taught him how to achieve immortality. Looting the chest here grants us the dragon scale that Gourd Grandpa mentioned, the same one that the Dragon King shed when he was beheaded, and a voice recites the same poem from that trailer. To me, this kind of echoes the same sentiment that Gourd Grandpa shared when he scoffed at immortality. What good is being an immortal when eventually you can still end up in a grave? The Dragon King was immortal, but he still ended up dead. But now we have the key to reach the hidden sons of the Dragon King. In Black Myth storyline, after their father was executed, we're told the Jade Emperor intended to punish the whole family. So the 4 dragon princes sought out Yuan Shoucheng and asked him about their fortune. He first said, "The Loong lies hid, not a time for action." So all 4 resigned from their posts, hoping to save their lives by retreating, but the Celestial Court never answered their resignation letters. Then one day, Yuan Shoucheng said their fortunes had changed to "The Loong lies hid, it stirs in the deep," meaning now was the time for action. So all 4 left their underwater homes and went their separate ways. The red dragon heard that the black bear Guai from chapter 1 was greedy for treasures and had the protection of Guanyin, so he traded in all of his valuable possessions to the black bear to acquire a cave in the mountains, where he slept in seclusion for many years. When he awoke, he wanted to fly again, but he found he couldn't even reach the clouds, so he sought help from the black bear again. The bear, being the ever-enterprising and greedy individual, sells him a censer he had taken from Guanyin, citing some ancient text about how dragons needed clouds to fly, and that the censer could create them. I don't know what these ancient texts were, but this is obviously not true. The mythology of Chinese dragons is they fly. There shouldn't be any footnotes, caveats, or prerequisites to their flight. But the red dragon believed him, and I think he might have done so out of hope. So he embedded a censer on his back, and when one wasn't enough, he added more. He was burning his life force to activate these sensors in order to fly, and even with them, he couldn't soar through the skies like before. The second dragon son can be found in chapter 2. Passing a sand waterfall, we can discover the Black Loong, who originally ruled over the river Qi. One cool thing to note about the 4 dragons is that each becomes more humanoid in appearance as we progress. Being able to take human form is usually a sign of a higher level of cultivation, so it's also representing that the dragon sons get harder and harder to fight as we go. From the Black Loong's portrait entry, we learn that the fishermen used to tell tales of the black dragon with a fierce temper. They said he would call thunder or flood entire lands for even the smallest slight. But they also spoke of a pearl of wisdom around his neck, which could grant enlightenment to anyone who held it. Many tried to brave the depths to acquire this pearl, only to come back empty-handed. But one day, a master thief with a necklace of moon-pale stones around his neck reached the dragon's palace. There is no character matching this description in Journey to the West, but I would guess that this is actually the yellow rat, because we know he was skilled enough to steal oil from Buddha's lamp, and he also wears a necklace of moon-pale stones around his neck. To the thief's surprise, he found the palace strangely silent and empty, with the black Loong sitting by himself. The dragon tells him that he doesn't dare to call even the smallest storm unless commanded by those higher up. Again, this is driving home the sentiment of, so what if you're an immortal? So what if you're powerful? You're still under heaven's thumb. He also says a fortune teller, Yuan Shoucheng, said if he hid well and killed a westbound monkey, he may be able to restore his honor. The thief said it was a fortune teller who led him there as well, and suggested there may be a strange design at work. Honestly, I think this strange design was just to lead them where they needed to be in order to fulfill their destinies. But in any case, the thief invites the black dragon to go with him to where he hails from, which is on the very road that leads to the west. We don't encounter the remaining 2 dragons until later chapters, so I will explain their whole story in a future video. But what I want to point out for now is each time we kill one of the dragons, we will receive an item that can be used to eventually craft the golden Loong staff in-game. This is the same staff that Buddha gave to Lingji in Journey to the West, the same one that turned into a dragon to subdue the yellow rat in the novel. In Chinese mythology, the 4 key parts of a dragon are its tail, its bones, its tendons, and its claws. After defeating the red Loong and the black Loong, we now have the thunder tail and the thunder bone. This suggests that the true identity of the dragon sons is actually the golden dragon with 8 claws split into 4. Moving forward, the Destined One reaches the Crouching Tiger Temple. Heading up the steps, we meet a gruesome tiger feasting on rat carcasses in a pool of blood. Diving into his journal entry, we learn that he's the older son of the Tiger Vanguard from the novel. After Bajie killed their father, he and his younger brother became orphaned, but they managed to fend for themselves using the skills their father had taught them. The elder tiger eventually rose to govern the remaining Yaoguai on the mountain, who dared not attack any villages under his rule. Thus, the elder tiger became known as a local deity for his principle of devouring the evil and shielding the good. However, the younger tiger, who is the mad tiger we'll meet later, grew resentful of his brother's fame, believing he deserved equal recognition. At this point, a century had passed since the yellow-winged Guai battled Sun Wukong and was taken by Bodhisattva Lingji back to the Buddha. But the yellow-furred rat had now returned to Yellowwind Ridge, along with a host of rats. The younger tiger sought revenge, blaming the sage for their father's death, and urged his older brother to drive off the rats. The brothers attacked the sage, but he used a vessel like a bodhisattva's severed head. Who do we know that's missing a head? When the younger tiger was gravely wounded, the elder tiger immediately surrendered to save him. Interestingly, the sage wasn't angry, and after learning who they were, even granted the elder tiger his father's original title of Vanguard. We've seen this before in Chapter 1 with the new Ling Xuzi and new White-clad Noble, where names are like titles and can be inherited by others. Learning of his elder brother's new role, the younger tiger felt betrayed and cut off all ties with his one and only remaining family. The Tiger Vanguard thus deeply resented the Yellow-Wind Sage, believing the rat had twice destroyed his family. So to cope, he vented his anger by eating the rats the sage had brought with him. I also want to add that the way this tiger speaks in Chinese is very crass. He literally says the rats need to breed more, basically so he can eat more of them. During the actual fight, thankfully, he does not appear to have the ability to rip off his hide like his dad in the novel, but he does have the ability to turn into stone, so still a related callback there. If you strike him with a regular attack when he's rock solid, your attack will be deflected. After defeating him, we can learn this spell for ourselves. The Headless Monk then appears again and sings us a song about how Sun Wukong and Zhu Bajie were tricked into attacking a rock, which is what happened in the novel, and he also asks us if it helped us recall our true form. Remember, Wukong was originally born from a stone that was nurtured by heaven and earth, so again, this is a hint for the Destined One's true identity. We also receive the Keenness of Tiger, which allows us to open one of the 2 passageways leading to the Yellow-Wind Sage. Notice here the design of the Tiger Tally statue is half human, half man, likely symbolizing the harmony they used to have. In the cellar of the Crouching Tiger Temple, we can encounter Shugo, He can help us make qingdan, which are elixir pills that can boost our stats. Similar to Shengho from Chapter 1, this dog is also one of the zodiacs. Now, we may have defeated the Tiger Vanguard, but the tiger's story isn't done yet. Upon a windy bridge, we can encounter the Tiger Acolyte. This character looks warped and corrupted now, but he was once a swordsman who fell in love and settled down to have a child with his wife. However, a fierce wind from the mountains caused a deadly sickness in the city, claiming his wife's life and leaving his child gravely ill. From the Mad Tiger's journal entry, we know this was the Samadhi wind, which was the Yellow Wind Sage's special skill. So we can deduce that it was the Yellow Wind Sage who summoned the Samadhi wind when he returned to Yellow Wind Ridge and secluded himself in the valley. Desperate for a cure, the swordsman heard about Bodhisattva Lingji who could heal the sickness. Upon arrival at his home, he learned the Bodhisattva had gone to Yellow Wind Ridge a long time ago. So he brings his son to the ridge, but the child's condition worsens because they're now right next to the source of the wind. They settled in Windrest Village so the child could rest, and the man continues his search for the Bodhisattva. One day, he hears a tiger's roar while passing a dry well. He climbs down and finds a hidden cavern where a wounded tiger was practicing his roaring technique. The man explains that he was seeking Bodhisattva Lingji to heal his son. And hearing this, the tiger spins a tale for his own gain. He pretends to be his older brother, saying that he was actually a deity who had been attacked by the Yellow Wind Sage who created the wind and took over his temple. The swordsman was skeptical, but after the villagers at Windrest said it was all true, he rushed back to the tiger with his son to beg for healing. The tiger had the child drink from his gourd, and suddenly the little boy regained some energy and could speak again. Not forgetting his manners, the little boy thanked him and praised him, and the tiger was moved. But the wind had harmed the boy's essence, his life force, and to fully tame the wind and cure his son, the tiger said he needed to regain his strength by consuming living flesh. The man was reluctant, but how could a father watch his son die? And so he began leading villagers to the well for the tiger to consume. The tiger also told the swordsman and his son to come back every day to drink from the gourd, or the boy would relapse. And sure enough, over time, the boy improved. He could walk, play, make friends, and every time he came to drink from the gourd, he would call the tiger Tiger God and share his food, toys, and experiences with him. It would seem the two formed a genuine bond with one another. Eventually, the tiger gave the gourd to the boy. But one day, both the man and the child stopped visiting. The tiger thought they may have run off with the gourd and went to the village to investigate. And what he found was a bloodbath and a little boy inside a coffin with a gourd still hung around his neck. The villagers had found out what the man was doing and had beaten his child to death. Consumed by regret and rage, the man killed every last one of the villagers in retribution before wandering into the sand and wind. I can only assume here that the grief and pain grew to consume him and corrupted his visage into what we see here. The tiger, though, carries the coffin back to the bottom of the well and vows to stop the cursed wind. In present-day Black myth, when we defeat the tiger acolyte, we can collect an old rattle drum toy which belonged to his son. Using this little drum at 3 locations reveals the voice of the child, who didn't believe his father was really feeding people to the tiger, and recalls his last moments when the villagers surrounded him.
咦，好厉害！你怎么知道我在这里？这个地方只有我和爹爹知道，嘿嘿。偷偷告诉你，有个帮我治病的好朋友，就住在下面。唉，好久没来，也不知他自个儿的伤养好了没有。你也一起下来玩呀？
We can find his spirit next to a well and follow him in, only to encounter the mad tiger, who still has resentment and revenge in his heart. After defeating the mad tiger, we're able to open a special chest in the arena, and some of you may have noticed that the animation is different from all the other chests in the game. The Destined One runs his finger along the lid, noting the layer of dust nestled on the top, and upon opening it, he hesitates. before retrieving the gourd within. This chest is the coffin that the little boy was buried in. We can even see the remains of a small skeleton, along with various knickknacks that I can only assume were the toys and items the little boy once shared with his tiger god. This whole storyline is extremely sad, and I actually teared up reading about the little boy. Both the father and the tiger are clearly not innocent, but it can be argued that they turned to desperate measures because they felt there was no other way. Besides pulling at our heartstrings, though, I do think this whole affair with the tigers serves another purpose. As mentioned, the story of Chapter 2 is intentionally told through various different perspectives, so we have to be careful in discerning for ourselves which characters are good and which characters are bad. From the Tiger Brothers' perspective, the Yellow Wind Sage is a villain because he broke up their family and brought the Samadhi wind that made the little boy sick. And this aligns with how the Headless Monk positions the rat in his opening song. But not all characters in the chapter share this viewpoint. So now let's talk about the stones. Moving onwards, the Destined One arrives at Fright Cliff. And pardon the pun, there is indeed something frightful happening here, for there are multiple chanting Buddha heads littered throughout the region. To understand the significance of this, we gotta rewind to the past. Note this bit is all new for Black Myth. This is not part of the original novel. Once upon a time, several cliff stones absorbed the essence of sky and earth and eventually transformed into sentient stone guai. One of these was a poise stone, a blue quartz guai in the shape of a woman who was capable of absorbing the essence of the moon. This allowed her to gain enlightenment faster than the other stone guai. So she and one other stone guai were named the mountain deities. One day, several Buddha heads randomly appeared, and they were bizarre. They were made of actual tissue and would scream loudly upon seeing any living creature, and if approached, they would swallow them whole. Side note here, while they're called Buddha heads in the game, they're not actually Buddha heads. Notice how the head's expression looks really menacing in the game? Contrast that with Buddha statues in real life, where they have more serene faces. So I believe these are actually Vajra warrior heads. Based on what I've read in Chinese Buddhism, Vajra warriors are protectors of Buddhist law. So they're typically depicted in real life with these more angry looking expressions. Unless I somehow missed it, the game doesn't explicitly tell us who was behind the appearance of these heads or why they popped up here. But knowing their real life purpose as protectors of Dharma, it's not unreasonable for us to assume it may have come from a Buddhist deity. I would like to point out the mustache here. But back to the story, one stone guai tried eliminating a Buddha head by crushing it into a pulp. However, the flesh of the Buddha head stuck to the stone guai's body and soon grew into a new stone head. The heads are parasitic. This infested stone guai then intentionally sought out other Buddha heads, crushed them, and allowed them to grow on its back. Thus, it became an evil creature called Shigandang, which no longer took nourishment from the universe, but fed on living creatures to cultivate, a clear sign that the stone guai was corrupted by the Buddha heads. In Chinese fantasies, when it comes to cultivation methods, there are the good ways, like meditation and other spiritual practices, and then there are other methods that are frowned upon because they can harm others and or are considered shortcuts. Feeding on living creatures is in the second category, and there are some implications for this that will arise in Chapter 4 later. The other stone guai sought to expel Shigandang and asked the poise stone mountain deity for help, but she initially refused, fearing her quartz would be shattered in battle. However, during the fight, she saw her allies losing, so she joined in and, despite her attachment to her quartz, launched them in a barrage of arrows against the enemy. Even so, the stone guai struggled. Her quartz was shattered by a punch and she fell to the ground in despair. Around this time, a yellow-furred rat had just left the kingdom of flowing sands. He saw the stones trying to drive Shigandang away. He immediately understood the nature of the Buddha heads and was moved to enter the battle out of a strong sense of righteousness. The yellow-furred rat approached the poised stone mountain deity and encouraged her to keep fighting, reminding her that what was broken could not be restored, but allowing the enemy to escape would be a greater loss. Inspired by his words, they banded together and finally defeated Shigendang. However, they couldn't kill him. The yellow-furred rat destroyed all the other fleshy Buddha heads in the region, gouged out their eyeballs, and placed them in the valley to seal Shigendang. In present-day Black myth, the Destined One can actually retrieve the 6 eyeballs from the chanting Buddha heads. When we remove the eyeball, each one chants one word, and pieced together we have... This is a very well-known Buddhist mantra that's often chanted to invoke compassion, peace, and to purify negative karma. Feels kind of ironic given that the Buddha heads are malevolent. And if we look at the item description, there's a quote that says, "They found the monk's worth wanting, and so they tore down his temple and destroyed its Buddha." This is a line from chapter 44 of Journey to the West, and the context is there was this kingdom called Guo that was in the middle of a drought. The monks in the city chanted to Buddha for rain, while the Taoists respectively petitioned their deities. In the end, 3 Taoist immortals came to the city and summoned the wind and rain to save them. So the king felt that the Buddhist monks were useless. So he wrecked their monasteries, defaced the Buddha statues, and mistreated the monks. This act of turning away from Buddhism is similar to what the king of Flowing Sands did. There's also a little more to the Shigendang story. After sealing him, the yellow-furred rat extracted the spiritual essence from Shigendang and gifted it to the poised stone mountain deity. She split the stone essence with the other mountain deity and they consumed it. It granted them great power. In return, the yellow-furred rat only asked that she take care of the mountain's inhabitants. Thus, they became the mother of stones and the father of stones, and they bore a son of stones. The father and son eventually leave, so more on that in future chapters. They used their newfound powers to make the mountain wilds thrive and could create other rock guai at will. Among these creations was the stone vanguard. One day, the yellow wind sage came to visit the mother of stones, only to be blocked by the stone vanguard. Worried it would become a threat, he called the tiger vanguard to eliminate it. The tiger agreed but was reluctant because they once worked together to rebuild the mountain. So he advised the stone guai to become a vanguard like him and keep a guard on Shigendang in the valley so they wouldn't have to fight each other. The stone guai agreed, and the sage appointed him as the stone vanguard the next day. From then on, all the stones moved to the valley to guard the sealed evil being. In modern-day Black myth, if the Destined One gathers all 6 eyeballs and releases Shigendang, the stone vanguard will fight him, but he will lose. So it's still ultimately up to us to finish the job. While all this was happening, another character, the keeper of the mountain, was stewing in envy and resentment. See, the yellow-furred rat asked this local earth deity to help in the fight against Shigendang as well, but he chose to remain a bystander. Consequently, he wasn't rewarded with any share of the stone essence that the mother and father of stones got, and he plotted to take the power for himself. So one day, he transformed himself to resemble a stone guai and pretended to be on an errand in order to safely approach the mother of stones. His plan was to crack her open to grab the stone essence, but just as he leapt to attack her, she let out a piercing scream which called several stone guai to her aid. Realizing that he was exposed, he held onto the mother of stones and managed to absorb half of her essence before the other stones could pry him off. The keeper tried to change back to his original form in order to fight back, but found that he couldn't because the stone essence he absorbed from the mother had turned him into a real stone. And this is where the Destined One finds the man in stone, still buried in the ground for when he got beaten by the stone vanguard and other stone guai. Remember what I said earlier to be cautious of everything you hear in this chapter? Yeah. The man in stone presents himself in a pitiful way, telling us that he was trapped in a stone and that there must be some strange secrets surrounding the mother of stones. After we defeat the mother and get the remaining stone essence from her, we can then give this to him and he finally reveals his true colors. He was just using us to get her powers because he thought it would make him human again. But the Destined One pommels him right back into the ground where he belongs. I did find this conclusion kind of comical because, as mentioned in my chapter 1 video, 土地公 aka keepers are believed to inhabit the actual earth. So this is quite the literal depiction of that. Now you may be wondering, why all this extensive backstory about stones? Feels random and not that relevant to the main story, right? Well, remember how the Headless Monk sang about the yellow-furred rat going on a killing spree? It's possible he's referring to how the yellow rat killed all the fleshy Buddha heads. There are no other records of the rat going on any other sprees. All his other fights were 1v1s or did not lead to any deaths. So to me, the story with the stones essentially serves as a character witness for the rat. Before this, we've already learned that the Headless Monk and the tigers dislike the rat, but now we have the stones who view him as a benefactor. From their story, we have context that the sage wanted to help others and had a strong sense of righteousness, defending the weak and rewarding those who deserve it. But to get the full story of what the truth is, we need to access the hidden area. And to do that, we need to sober up a drunk boar called the Yellow-Robed Squire. We can acquire a sobering stone from the man-in-stone merchant or looting it from a jar. And after giving it to the boar, he says he wants to go to Crouching Tiger Temple to get some food first. Honestly, I can't even be mad. He has his priorities straight. I too would prioritize food. After finding him at the temple, he says he has no interest in rat meat because they taste like humans. So we give him some juicy jade lotus instead, and he's finally ready to talk. He tells us about a land of gold where the sun sets in the west, where the people worshipped rats. However, the realm disappeared and that it was likely related to the Yellow Wind Sage. He also mentions a senior brother who gave him a gold piece that can be used at the right time. From his journal entry, we know he was to await someone at the bidding of his brother, this someone being the destined one. As you may recall, the white-clad noble in Chapter 1 also referred to a senior brother, and this, of course, is a certain three-eyed individual. But the boar no longer has the gold piece. The destined one was able to acquire it after defeating the first prince of Flowing Sands. But how did the rat prince get it? Well, the boar's portrait also states that he showed the gold piece to the Headless Monk, who tells him to be careful of thieves who'd want to steal it. To that, the boar said, "You're the only one I've shown it to. If it's gone, you will be the culprit." This could suggest that the Headless Monk took the gold piece and perhaps left it with the first prince of Flowing Sands. Heading back to Rockrust Flat, the boar is surprised that we have the gold piece and demands we give it back. After knocking some sense into him, he jovially says we can explore the realm together. Given the 180, it's likely this was all just a test for the destined one, set up by a three-eyed individual. Following him through the gate, the boar tells us the story of a colossal beetle that terrorized the people until a yellow-furred rat put a stop to it and harnessed its powers.
黄金之国也好，落日之国也罢，都已不复存在。传说这里的茫茫沙海之中，曾蛰伏着一只上古巨虫。这巨虫平日里沉睡地底，无踪可寻，一旦醒了，便会钻出来吞噬人畜。偏偏它外壳坚若磐石，寻常刀斧弓弩难以穿透，往来商旅不敢靠近，周边小国更是苦不堪言。适逢一只黄毛雕鼠下界，途经此地，感应到那巨虫身上似有无上佛力，于是施法镇住巨虫，收为己用。小国国王大喜，将鼠妖奉为护国神圣，更为他建庙塑像，世代供奉。鼠妖图修炼方便，干脆留了下来。后来，鼠妖神功出层，掳走了唐僧，与孙悟空激战于黄风岭，一时风沙蔽日，日月无光。那鼠妖的神风着实厉害，若非灵吉菩萨出手，怕是真经难取。只是没了鼠妖坐镇，古国自是难逃覆灭的劫数。而原本水秀山清的黄风岭，也变成了今天这般模样。
With that, we have now discovered this chapter's secret area, the Kingdom of Sahali. As a refresher, the secret areas in this game are manifestations of a character's obsessions, and this one is an event from the past. The first opponent we run into is the Tiger Vanguard of the Yellow-Winged Great King. This is the same Tiger Vanguard that Sun Wukong and Zhu Bajie fought in Journey to the West, the same one with the hide-ripping technique. Thank goodness we don't actually see him use this skill in Black Myth, probably would have been terrifying, but he does say he'll serve us as dinner to the Yellow-Winged Great King, which is a callback to what he intended to do with Tang Sanzang in the novel. After defeating him, he beseeches you to help his king and mentions he has 2 cubs. These are of course the Tiger Vanguard we fought earlier at the Crouching Tiger Temple and the Mad Tiger we fought in the well. Approaching the Yellow Wind King, he tells us about the setting sun that boils the Western Sea and the beetle that terrorizes the people. This beetle has an artifact that protects it from the yellow rat's samadhi wind. So the yellow rat says he'll bang the drum to lure it out, while we as the destined one beat it up and find an opening to remove the protective vessel.
若你愿前去，待时机一到，夺了他的法宝，我便能施法降服此妖。
Solid plan. The beetle called Fuban appears, and turns out its protective vessel is the Wind Tamer, nestled within the eyeball of a Buddha head that looks exactly like the ones littered across Fright Cliff. This would suggest whoever gave the beetle the protective vessel was also the one responsible for the chanting Buddha heads. From the source material, the Wind Tamer in Journey to the West was a powerful artifact that could counter the strongest of winds. It was given to Bodhisattva Lingqi by Buddha, so the implication here is Lingqi placed the Wind Tamer on the beetle, knowing that it would counter the yellow rat's samadhi wind. But why would he do this to terrorize the people? Because the kingdom had turned away from Buddhism, and this was their karma. After climbing onto the beetle and extracting the protective artifact, the yellow rat can at last join the fray.
我来助你！
Together, we defeat the beetle Guai and receive the Wind Tamer vessel for our efforts. It was so hype fighting alongside him, but now, in present-day Black Myth, we need to fight against him. Upon reaching the Windseal Gate, the Headless Bard appears again and bestows upon us a hair that he's been safekeeping until he could find its rightful owner. And with this, we unlock the Pluck of Many spell, which is of course a callback to Sun Wukong's Body Beyond the Body ability. In the game, we're limited to creating duplicates, but in the novel, Wukong could technically change them into anything. I will say it is a little suspicious that it's the Headless Monk that gives it to us. Perhaps he wants to continue to convince us that he's one of the good guys. Or perhaps he is simply ensuring that we succeed in defeating the Yellow Wind Sage, possibly because he has a personal vendetta against him. At the Yellow Wind Formation, we finally encounter the present-day Yellow Wind Sage, and he's carrying the decapitated head of a bodhisattva. The way he speaks and behaves here is completely different from how he was in the past.
要天地悬殊，就有腥风血雨。我逃不掉，你也逃不掉。
If you fight him without clearing the secret area first, he will summon sand tornadoes that will interrupt you and make the fight quite insufferable. But if you use the Wind Tamer, it gets rid of all of that and the encounter becomes much more manageable. He also uses the beetle we subdued in the hidden area. The fight has some interesting dialogue as well. Specifically, he says, "They will never let me go." Perhaps he's referring to the consequences of cutting off a bodhisattva's head, but to me, this alludes to the relationship between Sun Wukong and the celestial pantheon as well, because to heaven, due to Wukong's very nature, he will always be someone that they cannot accept. Doesn't matter that he suffered 500 years under a mountain. Doesn't matter that he did as he was told. Doesn't matter that he protected his master to get the scriptures. His very existence is an affront to heaven. Similarly, the Yellow Wind Sage is honestly in the same boat because he is a Guai as well, so he feels he would never be able to escape. Upon defeating the Yellow Wind Sage, who should appear but the Headless Monk himself?
你投二郎心法，夺大圣根器，还要师傅的脑袋，就为在这黄风谷底一时快活。
He was Bodhisattva Lingqi this whole time. From his dialogue, he tells us that the yellow rat happened upon one of Wukong's relics. We know this is not true because we discover later that Erlang Shen specifically gave the relics to the Yao Guai kings himself. Lingqi then says he was deceived into losing his head because the rat wasn't strong enough to harness the relic's powers. This I would categorize as partially true. As explained in my prologue video, strong artifacts can be difficult to control. You do need great power to wield them, so using a bodhisattva's head to channel the relic's powers makes sense. But I also mentioned that if you're not strong enough to use an artifact, it can also corrupt you. And I believe that is what happened to the Yellow Wind Sage given his massive personality change. Whereas before, he only wanted to help people and Yao Guai live dignified lives. But the version of him we see here now was solely focused on cultivating the relic. So much so, he secluded himself in the valley, not caring that his subjects, the rats and the tigers, were at each other's throats. Not caring that his samadhi wind was hurting people. Lingqi then tells us that we are the only one worthy of the relic and gives Wukong's fuming ears to us. Finally, he says something that is fully true. So now the question is, how did a powerful bodhisattva lose his head to a yellow rat? From Lingqi's journal entry, the Tiger Vanguard says that the Yellow Wind Sage entered a master-disciple bond with him for protection because as a Yao Guai, you got to be pragmatic. Immortals and Buddhas don't show mercy. It's all about mutual benefit. This maps back to the Yellow Wind Sage's dialogue during the fight. They will never let me go. And who else entered a master-disciple bond? Sun Wukong. In fact, jumping ahead a little bit, in the ending animation of Chapter 5, we see Wukong encourages his sworn brother, the Bull King, to find a master-disciple bond as well. More about that in a future video, but for now, just note how we are seeing patterns here where Yao Guai try to live according to the rules set by the Celestial Pantheon and Buddhas, but ultimately discover nothing they do will ever be enough because they are Yao Guai, and many immortals and Buddhist deities see them as inferior. The King of Flowing Sands also adds more details, saying that when the Yellow Wind Sage helped defeat the beetle, it had a Buddha head on its back, identical to the one he beheaded. Just look at that matching mustache. But the most illuminating info, however, comes from Ma Tianba. He says, an oil-stealing rat climbs high only if someone sets up a ladder. Remember in my Chapter 1 video, I discussed how so many monks died at the temple due to the fire, but Bodhisattva Guanyin did not intervene? This is because that whole ordeal was one of the preordained 81 tribulations that the Tang monk had to endure on his journey to the west. And just like the black bear from chapter 1, the yellow wind sage was also enlisted to participate in the prologue battle against Sun Wukong and was rewarded with Wukong's ears for his efforts. So Ma Tianba's line sticks out to me because it suggests that this whole thing with Lingqi may have also been a setup. There's no way the yellow rat could have bested him unless the Bodhisattva let him. This is conjecture, but it's possible that Lingqi knew the Destined One would come looking for Wukong's relic and would take care of the rat himself. This way, the Bodhisattva can appear to be above the fray and keep his hands clean, so to speak, manipulating us with half-truths and misleading statements while leaving the Yao Guai to fight against each other. Additionally, from the Yellow Wind Sage's journal entry, we learn of a meeting he had with the King of Flowing Sands, his sons, and the Tiger Vanguard. And even here he seems different from the yellow rat we met in the hidden area. In this portrait entry, he says to the group, "With my master's most prized vessel in my grasp, I can surely absorb that thing." Here he has already cut off Lingqi's head, so that thing is referring to Wukong's relic. Then he says, "I mean to enter secluded meditation starting today. I have appeased those old rascals from above, yet it will be wise to remain discreet." We can deduce that those old rascals are the immortals of the celestial court in heaven, because he appeased them by participating in the prologue battle against Sun Wukong. And by discreet, I believe he's referring to Lingqi's beheading. What's also sad about all of this is the yellow rat's obsession was righteousness. He wanted Yao Guai to live in dignified ways. He wanted to help people, but in doing so, he ended up hurting them. I think that's why he took such a big risk to try to harness Wukong's relic, because he wanted to be strong enough to protect his subjects. But he wasn't strong enough on his own, so he needed the Bodhisattva's head. There's also text in the game that hints that the yellow-furred rat knew that Lingqi was behind a lot of these calamities. So the beheading could have also been motivated by revenge. So what does this all even mean? To many of us, at the surface level, it may seem like Bodhisattva Lingqi is the villain in this chapter, but I do think that's a bit of an oversimplification. In the Boar's journal entry, when he talks about people stealing gold from Buddha statues, the Headless Monk asks if he believes in karma. And when the boar is dismissive, he sings a song about karmic justice. And this is the thing. While Lingqi and the Celestial Court are positioned as antagonists, they are operating based on their own code of justice. So to them, their actions are not evil. To Lingqi, it's simply karma, reaping the consequences of their own actions. Cause and effect. In the ending tapestry, the narrator even says that people could have put their faith in anything, but because they chose a Yao Guai, the yellow wind sage, they had to suffer the consequences for violating heaven's rules. To add to the greatness of it all, the Headless Monk's portrait details an encounter with a child who fell and injured himself. The monk steadied the child, healed his bruised leg, and mended his torn clothes. These are arguably the actions of someone benevolent, right? If we look at Lingqi's portrait, the opening poem details his change from an enlightened and compassionate being to someone with desires. We can guess here that the Bodhisattva was pleased when the kingdom of Sahali honored Buddhism by building a temple and renaming their kingdom. But this joy opened the doorway to more human emotions. When the king ordered the people to turn away from Buddhism, this joy became a regret. And suddenly, a Bodhisattva who should have cut off these types of emotions desired to punish the people for their transgression. Similarly, in the ending tapestry, the narrator tells us that once mortal compassion took root, bodhisattvas could fall as well. And yes, this is Lingqi. We see him using the golden staff, which transforms into the 8-clawed golden dragon from the novel. Bodhisattvas are also technically genderless. The narrator also strongly hints that the beetle was a bodhisattva's mount, and the most likely culprit again is Lingqi. But to add insult to injury, the yellow rat ends up defeating the beetle, and the kingdom ends up revering him instead. So to punish the people for this second slight, it is likely also Lingqi who turned all the humans into rats, leading to the disappearance of what was once called the Realm of Gold. It's almost like saying, you love a rat so much, okay, go be rats yourselves. This also suggests that what this bodhisattva and what Buddhism actually wants in the realm of the game is more followers and obedience for the order of their religion. This is also reinforced in the ending animation, which shows a young man rescuing a fox guai who turns into a beautiful woman. They appear to fall in love, have a child, and live a happy life together. But one day, the man comes home to see his wife feasting on their son, having reverted to her quote-unquote guai nature. He jolts awake and realizes it was all a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, but we see he ends up killing the fox out of fear. Ling Qi then says every being is born into their station, and that no one should try to change this order. If we're going off of Ling Qi's views, the fox was a guai, so that means she's inherently evil, right? The yellow rat was also a guai, so he should have known his place instead of being revered by an entire kingdom, right? The Dragon King of the Qing River should have followed the imperial decree and summoned the rain when he should have, instead of trying to avoid his destiny of being executed by a human judge, right? Lin Qi also addresses his entire spiel to Sun Wukong directly. Wukong was a guai as well, so he should have remained obedient instead of challenging the celestial order, right? No, because this notion is the opposite of what real Buddhism actually preaches, which is that all beings possess Buddha nature. Everyone has the potential to achieve enlightenment. What we end up seeing in the animation is the man killing the fox, all because of a dream. And this maps back to one of the themes I discussed in chapter 1. Across bodhisattvas, humans, guai, what separates between good and evil is just a single thought. So putting all of chapter 2 together with what we've seen in the prologue in chapter 1, this confirms that the authoritative system in Black Myth with the Taoist immortals and Buddhist figures are corrupt. How deep that corruption runs, though, remains to be seen. And a question also remains: can we change destiny? We'll see in future chapters. But for now, let me know what you guys thought about chapter 2. Did you interpret things in a different way? What was your favorite storyline? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe!